I am in love with this shirt. Hi friends, welcome back. My name is Addie of Well Loved Clothing, and my sewing machine and I are here to do a thrift flip today. I'm so excited because thrift flips are just my favorite. They're when I take a thrifted piece, whether it's already in my closet or whether I thrifted it specifically to update it, and I change it up into some new wearable items that I wear all the time. This really is a way that I can customize pieces and keep my closet super cyclical, and it is a really great way to keep your closet sustainable because instead of buying a new piece, you can change a piece that maybe you don't wear as often and give it some new life. So we are going to do exactly that today, and I usually do 3 flips in a video, but today I only have 2 because I think they're going to be a little intricate and really fun though. So in this video we're going after colorful, summery thrift flips. I have a whole list on Pinterest of thrift flip dreams that is basically me just pinning things that I think I can maybe make. So I was going through that list and I just picked a couple of images that I knew I had some pieces in my closet that I didn't really wear anymore and wanted to update, or some fabric in my fabric pile, which is just scary at this point. But I'm going to show you the before of the piece, the inspiration for what I'm thinking of turning it into, the process of sewing it, and then the after of the amazing final clothing item. So I have this big old pile of fabric and clothing, and we are gonna go after it. Let's do it. Okay, piece number 1 today is this adorable yellow checkered kind of houndstooth print dress. So this is just a really cute sort of prairie style puff sleeve dress with that really high neck and sort of voluminous shape, and I love this dress. I wear it all the time. I layer it, I put jackets over it for the fall. It's just a really great versatile dress. Though I love this dress, there are some strange kind of details on it, like that waistband that's just kind of a tube even though the rest of the skirt is gathered. It doesn't really make much sense to me, but we're going to kind of change that up a little bit. So my ideas for this dress is to make this kind of thing. So I love the simple strap dresses, and I keep finding that those are a little difficult to thrift, whether it's my area or just what I like to thrift typically. I love a midi dress, but it's hard for me to find tank top midi dresses. So I'm thinking, why not just make one? And since I love the pattern and the tiers of this skirt, I thought this would be the perfect option, especially since that waistband is weird. So we're going to keep this sustainable piece very sustainable and update it into one of those really cute dresses. So let's do it. So starting off, I wanted to separate the top from the bottom of the skirt, but I wanted to keep as much length in the top and top tier of the bottom part of the skirt. And so I'm cutting as close to the seam as possible, right above the waist seam for the top and right below the waist seam for the skirt. I could seam rip it, but this is just the easiest and quickest way to do it, and I prefer this way. With the top and bottom separated, I now need to take the sleeves off of this top. So I'm cutting right along the sleeve seam to give myself as much width as possible for my final top. With the sleeves cut off, I need to double check some measurements just to make sure I'll have enough fabric to do what I want. I do want there to be an armhole dip, but I also want this top to be square neck. And so for the desired length of the top that I wanted, I measured the top of my bust and the bottom of my bust and used those measurements with the existing arm dip to cut the fabric where I needed to. I then used the measurement from top to bottom bust to figure out how long I needed this top to be. I wanted this top to be about 7 inches long, and so I cut 8 inches up to allow for seam allowances. And here I have my 2 top pieces. So now to reattaching all of these pieces. So I'm laying the front and back bodice piece face to face and pinning down the 2 sides. So I'm taking that to my sewing machine, doing a straight stitch, and then doing a zigzag stitch along the edge of my fabric to finish off those seams. Once all my stitches are done, I'm ironing those seams to make sure they lay flat, and then I can start with finishing the bodice of this top. So I decided to do bias tape finishing, and so I got this really cute yellow color that goes really well with the check in this dress, and I'm also going to do bias tape straps. So in order to start this process, I need to pin the face of the bias tape to the face of my fabric. I'm starting with the top section of the front and back of this bodice because I'm going to use one piece of bias tape for the whole armhole and the strap. So I'm pinning in that ditch along the top of the fabric, using a single stitch to sew that down, and then folding the bias tape over to the back and pinning just enough of the bias tape on the back of the fabric through the front of the fabric so I can stitch the ditch and hide that seam and make this look really clean and nice. With the top of the front and the back of the bodice done, I can now do the straps. So I did one just to figure out the best way to do it, so I'll show you how to do the second one. I want these to be cute little tie at the top bow straps. So I took the measurement around the arm dip up to my shoulder and then just added a bunch of inches for this cute little bow. So I'm folding that piece of bias tape in half to figure out where the center of it is, because that's going to need to be at the bottom of my armhole drop to have equal lengths of straps. So once I find center, I'm opening up my bias tape and folding that in half because I need to make the angle of the bias tape match the angle of this arm drop. So you can see here basically how I sewed a little triangle into it and how that mimics the angle of the arm drop. So with that angle put in, I can start attaching my bias tape the same way that I did for the top. This part does get a little bit difficult because you kind of have to smush the fabric around to make it make sense. Since both of the angles are opposite of each other, since I'm doing the bias tape face to face, I always do the center pin first and then go out from the center and just sort of move the fabric around. I don't know a better way to describe it. That's just how I do it, and you can sort of see it here. So once that's all pinned, you get a better idea of what that angle did to the armhole drop, and I'm taking that to my machine to sew that down. And this is what it looks like after we've sewn it before we start pinning it around the other side. Before we finish the facing, I need to finish the edge of these straps. So I'm opening the bias tape all the way up and then folding in 2 triangles and folding the bias tape back up and then sewing a seam right along the top edge. You can see the finished product of that angled bias tape edge. So now I can close off this facing. We're using the same process where we fold it over and stitch the ditch on the front, and so I need to figure out how I'm going to pin the facing that's on the fabric to be ditch stitchable, but also have the straps match up and look clean. So I'm starting by pinning that top corner right in the ditch, making sure to catch the back of the bias tape, and then continuing that around the armhole drop and up the straps on both sides. Once it's pinned, I'm taking that to my machine and starting at one strap end, sewing all the way around the armhole drop and up the other side of the strap to finish this second arm. Onto the skirt. So since we have that cut and I don't need to take any of the length off of it, I'm just using what's already here. So I need to put one stitch with a very long stitch length across the whole top because we're going to gather this skirt. So I'm adjusting my settings and starting at the side seam for this ruffled seam. In order to make it easier to gather, I'm only going to the other side seam and then starting a new stitch for the back of the skirt. This just makes it easier to section off your gathers so you don't have to pull a thread around the whole skirt. Now for my favorite part. I don't know why I love making these ruffles so much, but I just think it's so easy and cute and fun. So I'm flipping my skirt inside out and also flipping my bodice right side out so that they're face to face and I can pin the ruffle to the correct side of the fabric. I'm pinning the 2 side seams together to mark where my gather begins and ends. So with those side seams marked, I tie a knot at one end of my gather seam so it doesn't pull all the way through, and then I take one thread from the other side and basically just start pulling and scooching that ruffle all the way across the skirt. When my ruffle side length matches my bodice side length, I make sure that the ruffles are all placed evenly throughout the skirt and start pinning vertically with the ruffle seam in the center of my pin. I continue this process all the way around the skirt, and this is really kind of eyeballing it to just see where I like the ruffles to be. So once that is all pinned, I can take that to my sewing machine and sew just barely underneath where the ruffle seam is, and then finish that edge with a zigzag stitch again. Iron everything flat so it looks nice and crisp, and this dress is done! So cute. I am in love with how this turned out. So I didn't really change the skirt much, but the top really changed everything. I think it really elevated it and made it look a little less like cheap with that waistband that wasn't gathered. Just had like a really weird shape to it. And I've been wanting one of these really cute, super high-waisted dresses. And I think these are so ladylike and perfect for summer. It's super lightweight, and with those cute little tie shoulders, it still has a fun detail. And I really love how the bias tape detail turned out too. It makes it a little bolder and a little more fun and interesting than if I just had like the checkered sleeves. So it's wonderful that these things turn out so good even when you don't have enough fabric, but it's just super cute, and I can even tie it in the back, like cross back too. I'm super excited to see what kind of outfits I'm going to create with this, but perfect for layering, perfect for summer. I absolutely love this. We're gonna move on to the next flip. Let's do it. Okay, last piece, best piece. I'm so excited for this one. This is what we're working with. It is a giant quilt. It's orange on one side and pink on the other. There is a giant hole. Long story short, my dog pooped on it and I cut out where she pooped and then washed it, and here we are. So if that grosses you out, sorry about it, but I really wanted to use this quilt and I didn't want it to go to waste, and there was still so much usable fabric, but it is adorable. It has this really cute little floral pattern and it's a pretty thin quilt, so it'll be great to work with, but it also has this beautiful sheen to it, and I think that I'm going to try to make it reversible, whatever I do make out of it. So my idea for this quilt is to do this. I love this top so much. It is gorgeous. The details on it are beautiful, and that really strappy back with this heavier fabric is just such a cool take on like a summer look. I also personally just love anything that's like kind of chill in the front, still really cute, but then the back of it is just like crazy, unexpected, this open back with all these straps. And so I'm definitely going just straight after this. I love it. I think it could be fancier like she has with the trouser and heels, or it could just be really chill with like some jean shorts, maybe Bermuda style, and some really colorful shoes and earrings. I think that would be so much fun. I am excited to do this, but a little scared. So let's just start with this amazing showstopper piece.
At the beginning of every project, I spend a good 15 to 30 minutes in front of the mirror just trying to figure out how I'm going to map out this piece of fabric, especially when it's something like this quilt. I wanted to figure out whether I wanted it to be a long top or even maybe a dress, and just figure out how I was going to gather the front and do a tie in the back and make it all look cohesive. So once I figured out my plan for the final piece, I started to cut out each piece. I still hadn't decided on whether I wanted this to be a shorter dress or a longer top, and so I just marked about 23 inches because that's going to be from the bottom of the bust to the hem. And so I used my little chalk thing and marked 23 inches across the whole of the fabric. When I'm cutting something this large, I do mark it out because I can't see the end of it and I will get really lost and my cut will be crazy. So once I have that marked out, I am cutting that off of the bottom. I also wanted to use the hem of the quilt that was already there so I wouldn't have to hem the bottom of this quilt, and it had a cute little pink edge to it since I'm going to use the orange side, so it worked out really well. With some of the remaining fabric, I needed to cut the piece for the top. This was basically going to be a long rectangle that I would taper later, so I'm taking those same bust measurements that I took for the yellow dress, but only using the top measurement, subtracting about 6 inches for the open back and cutting one long rectangle. We're about to have us another bias tape party because I'm going to use bias tape to cover these edges. This is a great way to finish edges on quilts like this because then they don't get too bulky and it still looks really great and finished. So I actually had this orange color that matched the orange quilt perfectly. So I'm using extra wide double fold bias tape once again and pinning that to the front of the edge of my fabric, sewing those face to face, folding that edge over, pinning it together, and stitching the ditch. For this one, I didn't have to worry about the edges of this bias tape because I was going to cover one side with another piece of bias tape and use facing on the other side. Now I definitely needed to decide how long I wanted this top to be. So I went with a longer top kind of length and pinned the spot that I folded down, measured the distance from the edge, and then marked that distance all the way across the fabric to cut it again. I also cut the skirt width down to size, and I wanted it to be 1.5 times the width of my top. So with that cut out and pinned, I took it to my machine and did a straight stitch down to create the skirt of this top and zigzag stitched the edge to finish it. For the straps and ties of this top, I'm going to be using some very very shiny little 1/4 inch ribbon. And so I didn't film this last part because it was just a little difficult for me to figure out, but I put bias tape in the center back of this shirt on the edges that would be exposed on this back since it's an open back top. I also needed a tube for this ribbon to go through for that tie back. But before I put it on, I put 2 buttonholes in it so that I would have a place for my ribbons to come out so they could tie in the center. So I'm using my little safety pin technique to push the ribbon through one side of the bias tape, out the buttonhole, and then pulling some excess so I have enough for my little bow, and pinning that on the end because I'm going to sew this to the inside of this bias tape. To attach the straps, I'm taking it to my machine and sewing this shape along that edge where the strap attaches. This just gives it really good hold since these ribbons are going to be tying something together and pulled on a good bit. Since I'm about to attach the top to the skirt, I needed to make sure that all of the edges that were exposed would be covered with some bias tape. So I'm finishing off about 4 inches from the inside corner on the top, which is the part that will be exposed with this open back. I'll show you exactly what I mean after it's all put together because it makes more sense then. But for now, I put the bias tape on, folded it over, sewed it down, and then I could start the gather on my skirt. So to do the gather, I'm doing a stitch with a very long stitch length just on the portion that's not bias taped on the back. I adjusted my stitch length to 4 and then started about 1 inch inside the bias tape and went all around the skirt to the other side. Since this top has an open back, I have to make sure that I leave the 6 inches at the back, but it really needs to be about 12 inches since that tie is going to cinch into the 6 inches for the final shirt. So I'm pinning my top to the skirt to mark where the gather is going to start and took some final measurements to make sure that the distance matched from side to side. So once that was all pinned together, I could start the gathering process. So I tied my thread in a knot at one end and then took one strand from the other side and started pulling the fabric. This was way easier to gather than I thought it was going to be, so I was very pleasantly surprised. I also only did one long stitch of gather since it was only one portion of this top that was going to be gathered. With my gathered fabric length matching the pinned out section of the top part, I can start pinning vertically across that seam. With my pins in place, I'm going to sew all along the back portion that's gathered, leaving out the bias tape section that you can see here at the edge that's going to be the open back for this shirt. So I'm stitching one long stitch right underneath that gather stitch, just the same as the yellow dress, but tapering at the ends to give that bias tape edge a nice finish. Here's a great look at where the 2 edges match in the back, but also the reason that I put this bias tape here. This top is almost done and I'm already so in love with it, so we need to put the straps into this top now. So I'm taking my piece and just measuring out across my chest where I want the straps to be, and that was about a 9-inch distance in the front. So I'm taking note of that measurement, and then I'm also measuring over my shoulder for where I want the length of this top to hit on me. So to mark those measurements, I'm finding and marking center of my fabric and then marking 4.5 inches to either side of that, since that will be my 9-inch gap in the front. So that's where my strap is going to lay on the dress, but then I need to also mark the length of the strap on the actual strap, leaving a little extra ribbon just in case. With my strap measurements marked, I can start attaching them and finishing this final part of this dress. So I was going to do the double fold extra wide bias tape like the rest of this dress is finished with, but I decided it would be easier and maybe even cuter to do the single fold and do more of a facing. It's also easier for those straps to come out of that because with a double fold, there's no place to put the strap. And so I start by pinning the bias tape face to face with the top of this dress and placing my straps where I have marked them out. A key note here is also to place that white marking on my ribbon with the top of my facing. It's not going to go all the way to the top of the fabric because I want the length of that strap to come right out of the top of my dress. So I'm making sure that all of my white marks are where they need to be and pinning all the way across this top and sewing down this bias tape, making sure to not get any of the straps caught in the sewing machine. Since this is also going to be a tie back top, I need to add the ribbon for the back portion of this top. So I am using the facing as sort of a pocket for this ribbon and folding over the edge so it's nice and finished, but laying that ribbon underneath it. And when I fold in the facing, then that will kind of encase the ribbon, but I have to make sure once I sew it that I'm going to do a stitch up and down that facing side so that the ribbon is nice and secure. So once I get that placed and pinned, I can pin my bias tape all the way around the front. And since this is a facing, it's just going to be quilted at the top. There's not going to be a bias tape edge. So once I get that folded down and pinned, I take it to my machine and sew that down, and this top is done.
I am in love with this shirt. It's so good. The orange quilt, and then it has the cute little pink lining too. I was gonna make it double-sided, way too difficult, and I just didn't really have the time to think through it. So I have some more fabric. I might do something with that later, but for now, this is so perfect. I might also shorten it at some point, but I'm kind of loving this like longer line shirt, especially with these wide leg trousers. But let's just take a second for the back. I mean, is that not so cute? I love the little drawstring bottom and how poofy it is, but then the cute little open back there too. I think it's such a fun touch to have this like oversized, really voluminous quilt with like this really pretty open top and the little open back. I just think it's such a fun juxtaposition, and I cannot imagine this shirt coming out any better than it did. And I love the little binding across the back too. I think it's such a cute touch to just finish those edges but give me enough space to do my little ties in here also. So I hope that this just inspires you to remake some of your old stuff, or just make simple updates to things you already have to make your closet even more sustainable and even more adorable, because I feel so good in this. Thank you so much for thrift flipping with me today and making these amazing pieces. I will see you next week. You are well loved. Bye!